on my side. There we go.
There we go. There we go. Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our session this morning. Today we have Deon Binneman as our guest speaker. Deon is a seminar thought leader and management consultant on building, protecting, and restoring business reputations. Deon is a consultant and trainer who has done crisis work in 17 countries. He has more than 30 years experience in crisis management and communication experience, and has provided advice to companies in 17 countries. In 2011, Deon advised the Department of Statistics during the 2011 census on crisis management and crisis communication strategy and protocols. Today, Deon will be taking us through food recalls and the potential impact on brand, trust, and costs. You will get to understand items such as the universal principle of duty of care, reference to health and safety legislation, and others. Feel free to pop any questions in the Q&A box. Snatemba and I will monitor these and answer them, or you can ask Deon some questions at the end of the session. And remember that we offer contaminated products recall insurance. So if you'd like more info, I can send you some brochures, I can send you our wording, you can have a look through. You can email me on Katia, C-A-T-I-A, at iTOO.co.za. Well, I'll pop that into the chat as well. You can email me anytime and I'll send you all the documents. So sit back, relax, enjoy the session, and over to you, Deon.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity, Katia. And yeah, so this morning, and let's make this a relaxed session, but business focused. And that's always been my style. So, you know, I opened my inbox this morning, and there's 2 notifications in my inbox under my alert section. One, Honda is recalling 250 to 500,000 motor cars because of a steering defect, a rod, something's wrong. So they're going to be putting out this massive recall exercise. Just think of the magnitude. Then the second one says there's listeria in 7 states in America. Peaches and plums have been implicated. And already 1 person has died, a number of persons are ill. And in this article, they talk about the people over the age of 65 is really compromised by listeria. And by the way, the world's largest recall exercise or biggest outbreak of listeria ever. We don't only have the World Cup for rugby, we also have the World Cup for listeria. So I'm going to unpack for you this morning, what is a recall? Why is a recall a crisis, in my opinion? What are the dangers? What are some practical considerations you need to take away with you? And what is the takeaway? So that you can go and think about it. So when you advise your management team or your clients, and you give them your professional advice, or your trusted advice, what they need to do. So in this diagram or picture, there's a sword hanging. We call that the sword of Damocles, which means that that little string is all that prevents a company from facing a crisis of some kind. And in my opinion, a recall is a major crisis, because when the recall situation starts, major decisions have to be made. You have to make ethical decisions. You have to make logistical decisions. You have to make decisions that will impact not only reputation, the brand, but costs, because a recall is not a cheap exercise. So whether it's laptop batteries that catch fire, and we've had plenty of this over the years, and Sony, more than 14 years ago, were faced with where they had to recall 600,000 batteries, and that cost them their place in the World Reputation Surveys in terms of quality. Whether it's pet foods, yes, we've had a Royal Canin who's had pet recall in South Africa, and you could just understand that when somebody's pet dies because of contaminated food that they ate, you are not talking about facts here. You are talking about emotions. I'm talking about my 89-year-old mother who, can you imagine if her companion, her dog, something happens out of the ordinary to that dog right now, she will be devastated. And whether it's processed meats that kill or make humans sick, I mean, where were you when there was that breakout of listeriosis in South Africa? Did you immediately stop eating Viennas like I did? You know, I like a late night snack as a slice of cheese and maybe a Vienna, and I had to stop my habit. So anything can be recalled. Condoms can be recalled. Then it's a bit too late. You can be recalled. Then, unfortunately, sometimes we stand in hospital, we stand by the graveside. But especially in the food industry, the reality of contamination is high because there are continuous processing of raw materials, manufacturing and production processes taking place. And that means that in that particular chain, health, safety, hygiene, chemical hazards, all of those can play a big role in the health and safety of the consumer. So in technical terms, a recall is an exercise where we request the return of a batch or a complete production run of a commercial product, usually because of a defect, a safety concern, or efficiency problem. Now, if you read that definition, it sounds so cool, sounds so easy. I mean, it's a simple case of, you know, let's recall the product, let's get it off the shelves, and let's dispose of it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if only it was that simple. Because there are many other factors to consider. It's like that definition says the art of business is all about buying and selling, and about a million things in between. To me, a recall is a business crisis. It's not just a challenge, it's a crisis. Because it can potentially impact the reputation and the trust that the consumer or stakeholder have in a company or a product. And the reason I call it a business crisis is if we look at the characteristics of crisis management or crises, it is normally a moment-to-moment intense experience. Imagine you sitting there, you are the CEO, you've got 150 things on your plate, and there's a knock on the door, and your quality control or quality assurance manager walks in and says, "We have a problem." And you say, "What is the problem?" You say, "Well, we've just discovered bacterial contamination in a certain product line, and unfortunately, that product has been distributed into the retail chain in South Africa. It's not only in the traditional retail outlets, it's already into spaza shops in all the various areas. What now? What are you supposed to do now? Where do you start? What is your venture point or your vantage point?" And from there on, this crisis will increase in intensity. Many years ago, I was faced to assist a client of mine in the petroleum industry. They phoned me at 20 to 5 on a Monday morning. The corporate communications manager at that time and place was traveling. Her phone was not charged. She was in a guest house with not backup. You know, it was long before power outages. And they couldn't get hold of her. And they went to the second one on their crisis list, which was me. And I got the call, and the customer said, "Look, we don't care what you are busy doing that day. We've already booked you a plane ticket. Please get to OR Tambo. We're flying you to Cape Town." So now I'm flying to Cape Town. Very little information. I arrive in Cape Town, I arrive at the head office of this company, and I walk into a room, 55 people in a room, ad agencies, marketing agencies, health and safety, quality. Basically what had happened, there was an explosion in the refinery. And the lady gives me a flip chart, the microphone, and a pen. And she says, "You are our consultant, now deal with the situation." And from there on, there was no time. There was hardly any time to go to the bathroom, because we had to put action plans and response plan in place. But we had a safeguard. We had already done simulation and scenario planning. We had programs and processes in place so that we could respond relatively quickly to the situation on hand. 40% of the oil supply in the country was impacted on by that crisis. So you could understand it immediately where there are human life at stake. The media and government will get involved. And you will have to deal with the requirements and expectations of various regulatory agencies. They're all going to want their piece of the pie. It's going to interfere with normal operations because you have to stop. You have to stop what you're doing. Companies like Ford, with the tire withdrawal many years in America, had to reallocate 500 managers to a war room situation. It's definitely going to impact the brand and reputation of the company because the eyes of the world will be on you. They will be scrutinizing your company to see how are you dealing with this recall exercise, especially if human life is impacted. So there is a cost impact. Now, because it is a crisis, a recall is a crisis, it is outside the normal run of activity. We need to remember what are the objectives in any crisis. And the objective is simply to protect the company's reputation and integrity. And we do that by responding and communicating efficiently and effectively. We do this by locating all defective products as quickly as possible, by reducing them in the field, but in other words, retrieval, removing them from the distribution chain, especially if there's life safety issues involved, and in the process, reduce lack of trust in our company. Again, these are all words. Once you translate them into practicalities, it's crucial. Now, in the medical industry and in the motor car industry, recalls have seemed to become a norm. You buy a product, and a few weeks later, they recall the product. But unfortunately, there are people who have died, people who have lost their babies because of contaminated medical products. And in the food industry, listeria in particular, in spinach, in lettuce, in places like America and in South Africa, has had huge impact and implication. Now, recalls can be one of two kinds. We can have what we call a voluntary recall. That is when the company decides and makes the decision to recall or withdraw a product from the market. Or it could be government or regulatory imposed. And this is a crucial decision-making time. I went to Wikipedia the other night just to look up a bit on the listeria case, listeriosis, which, by the way, Tiger brands are currently still facing a class action lawsuit because of that outbreak. It is 5 years, just on 5 years, the matter has not been in front of the courts. They are estimating that this class action lawsuit is going to be for somewhere in the region of 750 to 800 million rand. But what has really caught my attention in the Wikipedia article, and this is in public domain, was that management from Tiger Brands and Enterprise knew for 18 days that there were bacterial contamination before they went public. And they were actually forced by the NICD, the Institute for Communicable Diseases, to go public. So I'd like to contrast you just quickly two recalls with each other. The first one was Samsung. Samsung had a situation where some of their phones were reported to explode. The Galaxy Note 7. Through reporting mechanisms such as incident reporting, these matters were reported to in the countries where they were happening. This information got sent to the Korean headquarters of Samsung, and Samsung board immediately took responsibility for the situation. They convened and they decided straight away that what for them was more important than the product was trust and integrity of the company. And so Samsung made an immediate decision to recall the Galaxy Note 7 worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, the recall cost has been in excess of $5 billion. They only could not locate 6 phones. Those they killed remotely by software. But today people still buy Samsung phones because they restored trust, credibility, and reputation in the company because they made the decision to recall. They were not forced. Contrast that with an international car manufacturer operating in South Africa, where a guy in his Ford Cougar near Knysna, his car sets alight, he dies, his name was Jimmy. It actually ended up in a court case where Ford kept on saying that he committed suicide. And it took 53 exploding incidents where vehicles set alight themselves until our Consumer Services Commission stepped in and forced Ford Motor Car to recall that particular line and fix the problem. My question to you would be, who would you trust? The company that is forced, or the company that immediately made the decision to recall their product? Which one would you trust more than the other one? Now, what causes a recall? It's very interesting to see that the FDA, Federal Drug Administration of America, says each circumstance necessitating a recall is unique and requires its own strategy. With other words, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Each company is unique. Each company has their own standard operating procedures and their way of doing things. But we know that recalls come from accidents, laboratory tests, customer complaints, lawsuits, changes in legislation, regulatory intervention where government changes the laws, or where there is routine monitoring and epidemiological changes, such as with the chicken and the eggs story right now, or where information starts in the media, where people might be voicing their complaints about a product in the media, and the company picks up from that, or alternatively, get forced by government or regulatory agencies to make that recall. Now, for many companies that I speak to, management teams that I speak to, they see recalls as just a pure logistical exercise. Well, you wait and see as we go along that it is, yes, a logistical exercise, but there are lots of more ramifications. Now, recalls can be of three types. Class 1 is the most serious. That's the one that says if the consumer take that product or come into contact with the product, there will be a reasonable probability that they will suffer serious adverse health consequences, in other words, die. Class 3 is not as serious, but not likely to cause immediate adverse health consequence. But the big question that I would ask any management team, especially a manufacturer of a product, I would ask, what must you do when there's a recall situation? What should happen? What action steps should you take? It is like using the example here right now. If you are sitting there right now and you do not have a fire extinguisher at home, I feel sorry for you. Because you don't have the means with which to protect your family. In Vietnam, there's a wonderful proverb that says, talk does not cook rice. If you, right now, you don't have an emergency response plan for your home, and you don't have a fire extinguisher at home, and the people in your home don't know how to deal with a fire. We've had plenty of these in the last few months from the 77 people that died downtown Johannesburg. Your words are empty. So what must a manufacturer do to communicate a product safety recall to consumers? Because let's say your contaminated product is now into the retail outlets, into the spaza shops, being sold on the side of the road. How are you going to get that message to the consumer to say, look, do not touch or use that product. It was harmful to your health or to your family's health. Because some people rely and will say, let's advertise on TV, let's put it on the radio, let's put it on websites. Well, not everybody has access to that forms of media. How will you get your message out there? It's a serious question. And that means that if I had to go one step back, that if you don't have the ability to do that, you're going to have to work closely with public relations agencies because they have databases, media lists of all the media outlets to which your information needs to get distributed. So the question is, if you needed to remove a product from the market right now, would you be able to do it? Would you be able to do so quickly? And would you be able to remove all product, especially if there's a health and safety implication? Would you be able to inform all affected consumers not to use that product? This is serious. What if people don't watch YouTube? What if people don't listen to the radio? What if that item is already in the fridge and the kids who are at home right now want to make a sandwich and they open up the refrigerator door and they take cold meats out of a packet to make a sandwich and they don't know it's contaminated because mom and dad's at work? You have to factor that into your processes. You also have to factor into your process, would you be able to inform or warn all affected parties about the dangers and process of the recall? Your stakeholders would want to know what is the potential cost impact of this exercise on future profits if you were a shareholder. So recalls will be publicized and has to be publicized because people are using your product. And that immediately raises then questions over the efficacy and validity of your brand. Can I trust you? The picture in the middle was actually a cartoon that came out during the Toyota car recall. Ladies and gentlemen, better luck next time. It may mean penalties. Penalties, as you will see in a moment, in some countries are different to the penalties in our country. But the fact of the matter is that you will be scrutinized. And statistics show that a company who faces a crisis are 75% more likely to face another crisis in the next 30 days. The reason being that once we start scrutinizing, where there's smoke, there's fire. Once they uncover a problem in one department, they will uncover a problem in another department. Unfortunately, we all know about what happens when the internal auditors arrive. They always manage to see the things we don't. But the cost implications can be huge. The cost implications of you conducting your recall, like a Ford Cougar example, could be even worse than the cost of the recall itself. Some internationally publicized situations where the peanut company in America, where there were contaminated product, they knew that there were problems. There were 9 people who died, 600 people that fell ill. There were criminal investigations. The company closed down, but the managing director got sentenced to 28 years in jail for knowing that his products were contaminated, but took too long to take them off the market. We had the huge international melamine scandal in China, where manufacturers were using melamine, which is wood powder, making it into a fine powder and throwing it into the milk supply for children, because when you weigh it, it shows up as increased protein content. Well, more than 50,000 babies got ill. There were a number of deaths. In China, they don't have the same legislation as in other countries. It was a simple scenario. The CEO, a lady of this company, was sentenced to jail, sentenced and executed. In South Africa, we have the record as the biggest listeria outbreak in the world to date. There were 216 people who died. There are people still suffering. Just last week, the Daily Maverick had an article about a lady whose kid was still being impacted. The kid was in the womb at the time when she got treated for listeriosis. The Wikipedia article says they knew that there were contamination. More than 5,000 tons of affected food had to be destroyed, and by the way, not burnt, had to be buried under the ground. They traced the contamination eventually to the Enterprise Polokwane factory. Tiger Brand sold the business in the meantime. But reputation is at stake because you were the owners of the company at that moment in time. And the CEO at that moment in time has actually refused to admit liability. He's gone. He's gone. Right now, there's a class action lawsuit by Richard Spoor and company against Tiger Brands. It's 5 years later. The matter is not in front of the courts yet. They're still collecting evidence and materials. That's how long it takes for those people impacted on by a food safety issue. But it's still going to cause damage, and it is still causing damage to the brand name of the company. Research clearly shows that recalls are extremely costly. Costly because, just think about, let's just go one step backward quickly. All the affected product had to be collected and destroyed in a manner which the government requires. That means you couldn't just dump it anywhere. You would need to destroy it in proper areas. You know, it is like a simple check, if I may use that as an example. A simple check that a health and safety inspector or a health and safety person qualified, what they call an inspection authority auditor, would do. So part of the inspection, physical inspection of any building or facility, is to inspect the bathrooms. You would inspect health and hygiene standards in the bathroom. In a ladies' bathroom, there will be sanitary waste bins to dispose of their biological, physiological needs. That piece of equipment in a company, there is a document called a manifest. A manifest is a document that says that whoever collected these materials have taken it to an approved facility where it can be destroyed according to appropriate hygiene standards. That's called a manifest. So that kind of documentation has to be in place. So if your company is faced with a recall, who's going to collect the product? Who's going to destroy the product? All of these questions have to be addressed, and if you don't have a plan of action on how to deal with this, how long will it take you to get an approved supplier through the supply chain process these days in terms of compliance? You need to have those people on your books on a retainer basis. You would need to have communication and public relations agencies who will help you with your communication part of the crisis. You would need to have them on your books. Now, there are procedures. The Federal Drug Administration, for instance, have a procedure when it deals with contaminated pet products in America. So pets become ill, they receive customer complaints, they put a process in place, they start to investigate, they work with the industry to recall these products, they issue public alerts, they do testing, inspections, and in the meantime, distribution of products might cease, batches might have to be collected, and there might be changes to legislation, changes to industry norms and practices. But you will be scrutinized. You'll be scrutinized before a recall, during a recall, and after a recall. And traditional questions that stakeholders will ask is, when did you have an inkling that there was a critical defect or something wrong in your system organization, product, or service. By the way, similar questions were asked at the Zondo Commission. How come the auditors didn't pick up that there were corporate governance collusion? If you did not know that something was wrong, why not? Why did you not have robust food safety testing? You know, I'm thinking back to the guy who was sitting on the toilet in the beginning of my slides. What, if anything, did you do about it? So the stakeholders are going to say, yes, you had a crisis. Yes, you were faced with a recall situation. What did you do to protect us? And if you didn't, why didn't you? And if you had known beforehand that such a crisis was possible, what could you have done? Ladies and gentlemen, Noah built the ark 7 days before it rained, but he had access to divine wisdom. I hope that I'm sharing divine wisdom with you today so that you can understand that the recall is real. In fact, international research will show you that a recall can either be one of two things. It's either design related or manufacturing related. And in fact, best practice says that a recall should be part of normal manufacturing and design processes. In other words, when you manufacture a product or design a product, you should already be asking yourself, if I needed to retrieve it from the market, can I do so? And for that, you need a plan. Unfortunately, the just do it mantra doesn't work. You need a formal plan and process in place. And that means that we need to look at a couple of areas of concern. The first one is loss of control. The moment your quality guy walked in the door and told you that there was a crisis, that there was contamination in your product production line, there is the potential of loss of control. I liken it to, for those of you who have ever been to advanced driving, when the car is skidding and the wall is coming closer and you are starting to panic, they teach you to focus on the outcome. And that outcome must always be to protect the reputation and integrity of your company. We know that bad things happen to good companies. So how do we regain control of a situation? Whether it is in the form of emergency, and a recall to me classifies as an emergency. And the reason I say that is that time is of the essence. Depending on what kind of recall you're faced with. A class action 1 recall means lives are at stake. And that puts us directly into the category of an emergency, which means time is of the essence. Some recall concerns, regulatory complexities, different agencies have different requirements, different reporting requirements. There might be health and safety concerns. There might be demand on internal resources, brand issues, communication issues in a connected world today, where everything is interconnected and bad news spread at the press of a button. 20 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, we spoke about the fact that we had a number of minutes available or hours available in order to make a decision. You no longer have that time. Consumers, as they are eating or as they are busy eating, are looking at Facebook. And there they're busy eating the meal and they realize it's contaminated. They take a picture of that with Instagram. They put it to their blog. They put it on Facebook, on TikTok. Whatever the case may be, they even have the restaurant's name where they ate the product at. And that information then goes viral. What about return, refund, or repair issue? I was telling Katja and them about an example of a young man. He had only been with the company for 2 weeks. He was actually still undergoing induction. He got sent to pick up defective products at the retail outlet. So he went with a delivery van, picked up these items, and They loaded the back of the van, and on the way home, he kept on looking over his shoulder because some of these tins looked okay to him. Now, dented tins we know has a bacteria in called botulism, Botticelli, which becomes botulism, and botulism is so dangerous that the little speck of botulism can kill 100 people in a room very easily. So any swollen tin, dented tin in retail is taken out and destroyed. And this young man, because he didn't have proper knowledge, put some of the tins aside and he distributed it in Germiston to some people who were really struggling. And two of the young kids decided to make a sandwich, and some of these sardines, contaminated sardines that they ate 20 minutes later, two kids had passed away. So who will pick up and take the items away, and will they destroy it in a means that your reputation will be protected? What kind of instructions will you give? I saw a picture the other day on a website that said, take product and throw it away. So now you throw it away. You throw it away in the dirt bin, which means your recyclers get hold of it. It goes to the local dump where there are communities living. There are animals there. The birds get access to that contaminated product. So that might not be an appropriate way to dispose of it. Sometimes you go on a house cleaning exercise, and now you take and you discover a whole bunch of medication in your house that has expired. Throwing them in the dirt bin is not appropriate. Throwing them into the toilet and flushing it or in a drain outside is also not appropriate, because that gets into the water table. By the way, the correct means would be to take it to your local pharmacy, who will arrange for it to be incinerated in a medical incinerator. But the public doesn't always know that. So you would need to be very clear on what to do with your defective product. Your consumer in a recall has certain criteria that they apply when they look at your company and your product. From brand values to quality to food safety. Some of you may recall the crisis with Pick and Pay had, where Maggie noodles and Oceana tin cans were tampered with. This is about, I can't remember the exact date, 20 years ago. Sean Summers, which by the way is now being reinstated the CEO at Pick and Pay, him and his team dealt with that crisis in a textbook fashion. But a year later, Pick and Pay went public to say that that crisis had cost them that year alone 180 million rand in drop of turnover. My own wife, she wouldn't go to Pick and Pay. We had the Pick and Pay close to us. She rather drove to Checkers, because in her mind, the contaminated products were sold at that particular outlet. It's the same thing that's called the law of association. If I fall in your foyer of your building, which by the way has happened to me, I don't care that you had an outsourced third-party cleaning service who cleaned the floor, who didn't mop it up properly, who didn't put proper signage there. I don't care. When somebody asks me and says, where did you fall, Deon? I name the building. I don't name the third party. So there's one thing that you can never outsource, and that is your reputation. There might be traceability concerns. Can you trace the product? Can you trace the contamination? And how long will it take for you to trace? Forwards or backwards? Backwards, the raw materials. Where did the raw materials come from? Can you trace it to which farm there were potentially listeria on? So record keeping and fine record keeping is critical. So the question then arises, how can you design or perform a recall in such a manner that it can stand up in a court of law and in a court of public opinion? A court of law is mandatory in terms of legislation and in terms of agency requirements and so forth. But in the minds of the public, did you act in our best interest? How long did it take you? How long did you wait before you conducted your recall? So how reasonably practical in a court of law, reasonably practical is a definition that comes from the Health and Safety Act, that you do everything that a reasonable man would have done to recall your product. So here's a question then. What if your agents or your distributors don't play or the game? Example, here's the general manager of a spa. He has got a number of products that are being delivered. He's got sales concerns. Head office person might be there, glaring over his shoulder. And now comes an email to say one particular product is contaminated. Please withdraw the product immediately from the shelves. He makes a note of it in his task manager, but it's number 132nd on the task manager list. He'll get to it just now. But then just now might mean people might die. You have to think about this in your plan of action, about how can you make sure that they, your agents, your distributors, understands the concern of the situation. So before the time, it's absolutely critical. Part of restoring control is about assessing vulnerability, risk, and hazards. Vulnerabilities of a system, the risks in the classic definition of the word risk, probability versus outcome, and hazard, sources of danger. All three of those have to be factored into the situation. You need to have a plan, an effective, workable, written plan, where you define the words, behaviors, and actions that will be necessary to conduct an effective recall. The best plan, above all, ladies and gentlemen, is to prevent the dominoes from falling. And that means that you have proper quality controls in place, proper food safety testing in place, proper health and hygiene, compliance with the Occupational Health and Safety Act and all the other forms of hygiene and health standards and prescriptions that come with the turf is absolutely critical. I was telling Katja yesterday, about 15 years ago, I was busy running a workshop and we were in a company. So this company, their mission statement is, we love smell. So they basically make the fragrances for things such as dishwashing powder, washing powder, and so forth. We were in a laboratory situation. So hairnet, white clothing, boots covered, and they're taking us on a walkthrough. When in walks the CEO, no form of PPE. So I took a look at the situation, and it's not my duty because I'm an outsider, but I say to my team of people, what are you going to do about it? And one young lady went and asked the CEO to leave. And he did, on a huff and a puff. So I knew that I had to protect this lady. So I went and found the CEO and I explained to him that I'm there. I was running a health and safety workshop. I'm there, and leaders lead by example. And he looked at me and he said to me, you know, I'm so sorry. I didn't even think about it. I was in such a hurry. How often does hurry and contamination not happen because we don't follow standards? Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes when people travel internationally, and I know how to protect myself, one thing that you never want to get is a form of gastroenteritis called New Delhi belly. It's the world's most dangerous gastroenteritis strain. That if you could get that, you will spend 48 to more days on a piece of white porcelain praying for forgiveness for all the things you've done and the things you're still about to do. Because you cannot keep any forms of food or liquid in your body. Now, in order to prevent contamination, we put out there, let's say, a checklist for any executive, and we warn them of potential travel risks. One, never use ice. because overseas they use grey water and different kinds of water to make ice with. So to protect yourself, never use ice in your drinks. Right. Executive goes overseas, follows the risk warnings, comes back, and the first thing we say to him, how'd it go? Yeah, everything was fine, but I still got diarrhea. He says, I know where contamination took place. He says, where? I said, well, did you brush your teeth while you were overseas? Oh, of course I brushed my teeth. Did you use bottled water to rinse your mouth out? Yep, I did. How did you rinse your toothbrush? And then the executive stands and looks at me and starts to wry smile appears on his cheeks because habit. He rinsed his toothbrush under the tap and not with the plastic bottle of water. That's how easy it is for contamination to take place. So preventing recalls actually starts with quality control, risk management, adherence to health and safety standards and hygiene standards in your manufacturing processes. That's actually when a recall exercise actually starts. Prevention is still the best form of action. But we know that bad things happen to good companies. Now, no army goes to war without a plan. Operation Desert Storm, the invasion of Iraq by the US. 6 months in planning, 2 days in execution. 6 months after Congress said they would enact their plan, did it take place? Why? 3 problems. 1, getting the flight deck ships into position. That was a big logistical exercise. 2, getting enough condoms. Yes, the American government gave condoms to their soldiers, but ladies and gentlemen, not for sexual use, but to cover the barrels of the gun because there was desert and sand in the barrel of a gun will destroy a rifle. So they had to find manufacturing supplies for that. And third problem was an uninterrupted water supply. They bought up 80% of the water, bottled water for their soldiers for the invasion. But it took that long to get everything in place. For you, when your client deals with a recall, you need to ask him, do they have a plan? Have they tested their plan? Do they have a team of people that they've identified to be the recall crisis team? When last have they got together? It's a legal requirement to do a fire drill once a year. We know that recalls are real in manufacturing industry. Should you not have regular process reviews? What about training for those who are going to deal with the media? And by the way, it's not just traditional media, it's social media today as well. Your team would need social media training. What about counseling skills? Counseling skills, very important. If you are going to deal with a family who has lost their child because they got in contact with your contaminated product, how are you going to be able to communicate to those people if you don't have the necessary empathy and skills? And do you have suppliers on standby? Suppliers for all likelihood. If you needed me in a recall crisis situation and I was not on a retainer with you, you'll die when you see the daily rate. Because it's going to dictate a lot of time, effort, and resources. You've got to do your planning in advance. Then there are legal requirements for having a plan. There's ethical reasons for having a plan. Ultimately, you want to maintain customer trust and reputation. And having a plan is absolutely critical to do that, to think through all scenarios and eventuality. Another question I would have for you is how quickly can you get the message out there with regards to your recall? How quickly would your plan kick in? We normally do 3 levels of testing. One is called notification and activation. All we do is it's a Saturday afternoon, you get a phone call, you got to get to a particular hotel or particular predetermined site, and we measure how long it will take the team to congregate. Or today virtual, how long will it take us to congregate? That's the first level testing. Second level testing, desktop simulation. That's when a facilitator like I come in, I facilitate a case study, a recall situation with you. You, the team, you got to write up your plan on flip charts. That's quite an interesting to see how people think and what they come up with. And then thirdly is when we actually do simulated drill, for instance, removing one product from the warehouse. This is a practical example. The other day, a guy gets to the confessional, and the bishop is on the other side, and he says, "Yes, my son." He said, "Oh, Father, I came to confess." And the voice said, "No need to, my son, it's already on Facebook." That's how quickly negative information can move these days. So, ladies and gentlemen, having a plan for a recall is absolutely critical. I have a checklist. You can also go to my website for articles that I've written on recalls. But I have a checklist with about 100 questions on that would need to be part of a plan like that. You need to profile your stakeholders well in advance of the crisis. Who are your regulatory agencies? What are their information requirements? What is their inspection requirements? What is their record keeping requirements? If there is, for instance, an accident in a company and there's a fatality, you, for instance, this is part of the Health and Safety Act, have to notify the Department of Labor immediately, within 24 hours of this particular incident that culminated in a fatality. There's reporting requirements. So what about the media? What about the affected parties? How quickly can you communicate with them? You need to have a recall team leader. This person's duty and function is to appoint a team of people. The team needs to know their roles and responsibilities before the crisis comes. Just like we have firefighters, evacuation wardens, occupational health and safety representatives, when you talk about health and safety in the workplace, your team of people who will communicate with the media, who will communicate with people who phone in who want more information, who will launch a website with Q&A, recall instructions, destruction instructions on the website. Who will do that? You have to predetermine roles and functions. I hate to use the South African rugby team as an example, but Rassie Erasmus and them made sure that some of the team members would fulfill other team members' roles. That's why they didn't bother when they went on the field with a 7-1 split. You need to have regular testing of your plan. The example of the Kung Fu master who's doing the kata there, it says, if you can't do it slow, you can't do it fast. That is the reason for simulations, refreshers, and training. You see, ladies and gentlemen, it's not just about the recovery of product. It is also meeting the wants and needs, expectations of all stakeholders. Bad things happen to good companies. We accept that. But that's how we respond and how we act, how we communicate, that will either take away trust or instill trust in the consumer. It is when people say, I know that thing has happened, but I trust management to fix it. Trust is everything. So let's quickly recap. You need a recall leader. You need to explore best practices for recalls, traceability, and readiness. You need to have a team. You need to have processes in place to get information reported to you. And then that team needs to be able to act and follow the predetermined plan. When ER24, their two medical representatives arrive on the scene where there's a collapsed colleague, they don't care what your seniority levels are. They will zero in on what they need to do to protect the individuals that's at stake. In a recall crisis, you as representative of your company, if you're the recall leader, needs to act in such a way that the brand name will be trusted and that reputation will not be destroyed. There is a universal principle that goes way beyond compliance with local or international regulations. And that is the universal principle that says we care, the duty to care. Ladies and gentlemen, a recall exercise is not just a logistical exercise. It is about demonstrating care while you act. Everything you say should show concern. To the elderly lady who's lost her dog, who lost her companion, she couldn't care about how many batches you have tested, that for the last 25 years you were the #1 brand leader in the country in terms of dog food. All in her mind is that you are the person or the company that took her companion's life away. So concern, dealing with emotions are sometimes critical. The actions you take and accountability. Samsung did not hesitate. Samsung did not hesitate. Samsung didn't try and say, who are the other players in the market, such as what Tiger Brands and Enterprise are doing, say they're not the only players in the, processed meat sector. If it is your product that is contaminated, are you prepared to stand up and say, listen, it's our problem, it's our product, our brand value says very clearly, we care. Maya Angelou is a world-famous African poet who said the following critical words, and you need to write this down as part of thinking about crisis planning. She said, people will forgive you for making mistakes. She will never forgive you for not caring. Care, commitment, and action is what it's all about. If you want to maintain your company's reputation and integrity and trust. And that means that you need to have a tested plan, a trained, competent team in place, ready to deal with the hand of fate. Recall insurance, in my opinion, is a no-brainer because the cost impact of a recall far exceeds traditional budgetary requirements. When a crisis comes, your client needs to be able to factor in and to cost allocate everything to do with that crisis to a particular cost center number. That means a pre-approved war budget. That means pre-approved recall insurance, and that means pre-approved third-party suppliers on call. I'm a resource to help you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your opportunity to ask me questions right now. We care is the message. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deon. That was excellent, interesting. We've already reached 11 o'clock. I know a lot of people are dropping off now. But thank you so much for that very informative presentation. And now we know that how important it is to have a recall plan in place, to have it tested regularly, not just put away, to make sure your crisis management plans are in place and they're also up to date. And then your traceability challenges, which was very interesting to hear about tracing your products forwards and backwards. Everything else on the presentation was brilliant. We will upload this onto our YouTube channel so that people can then go back to it. Very informative. Thank you so much, Deon, for your time this morning. And we look forward to hearing from you again.
Are there any specific questions that a member of the audience may have asked that I need to address before we drop off?
There is one that's come through from Sharon quickly. She just wants to know, what can you do if the recall was due to industrial sabotage?
Industrial sabotage, again, is out of your control. If you have done everything minimum, what we call legally possible or reasonably practical to protect that product, then you've got to get to a point and say, whatever the reasons for the recall is besides the point. There are stakeholders involved. There are potential health and safety concerns first and foremost, we care. We care. We withdraw the product. Yes, we will stop leakage. We will stop the leakage. Unfortunately, you know, people tamper with products. In the case of Tylenol, Johnson & Johnson, they changed the packaging of the product to make it untamperable. So maybe you need to then go back, re-examine your processes, and if necessary, close all gaps. That's what I would recommend. I trust that answers her question.
Thank you, Deon. I'm sure it does. I can't see anything else that's come through. I don't know if Snatemba, you've picked up anything in the chat.
Just one question from Rodney. He was asking, what is Deon's website address? So I guess if anyone wants to contact you or read more about what you do.
Very easy. It's www.deon, D-E-O-N, Binneman, N-E-M-A-N.com. And by the way, for some of our ethnic colleagues, it is Binneman.com, but they sometimes call me Mr. Pagati as well. So if you write me a mail and you call me Mr. Pagati, I won't mind. Because for Inside Man, DeonBinneman.com.
Thank you, Deon.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deon. Thank you, everybody.